the Star City. This is Scarlet Fever, a daily Nebraskan production.
Here now with Ben Beecham. We did the original recording of this. Ben was on a plane. He was flying back from Southern California.
Yes, I was.
He was out covering Nebraska, USC football. Fun little trip for the Daily Nebraskan. We had, 4 or 5 people that were out there.
Four people went.
Pretty fun experience, and we wanted to get some insight as well into someone who was actually on the ground and getting to see everything that went down from Nebraska's 4th straight loss and continue to just evade bowl eligibility. And we're back again with the same old story from last season. Now we're 5-5 going into the last 2 weeks of the year.
Yeah, it's disappointing to say the least. They went on a 4-game losing streak last year. Same thing to end the season. It's just rough. I mean, especially in these games where they're matched up closely with these teams. I know USC was, I think, a 7.5-point favorite it closed at. But even that, Rule in these close games has just not really shown the ability to kind of elevate them, especially when it kind of gets into crunch time. It's a little disappointing to see, but they do have 2 chances against pretty similar teams, so have a little bit of optimism there.
We wanted to talk a little bit more about the experience, though, getting to go to Southern California, getting to go to the Memorial Coliseum. So tell me about what it was. As soon as you walk into the venue, you get to walk around the field, go up to the press box. Like, what was that whole experience like before the game?
Coliseum, I didn't realize how situated in the middle of LA it was. I thought it was more like outside. But like once you get in the press box, all you can see is just like the whole Los Angeles skyline. Like you could barely see the Hollywood sign in the distance. But it's just like a complete different landscape from Lincoln, obviously, sitting in the press box. Coliseum's a beautiful stadium, very wide. Walking in was really cool, seeing like all their Heisman stuff laid out. Amazing stadium. It's just too bad they can't really fill it all the time. But it's beautiful out there.
Do you think USC would benefit from an on-campus stadium?
Probably, but I don't know how much more they would benefit. I just don't know how big of an interest there is for USC football outside of students that they would benefit from that. Plus, the Coliseum's just so historic that you can't really move them from there.
Yeah, it is such a historic place, and having the Olympic rings on the massive monument wall with the Olympic torch, and the fact that it's going to be hosting ceremonies when the Olympics come to town in a couple of years, just goes to show how much of a crazy cool venue that is. And we saw some pictures coming out. You sent one out from one of our photographers, Cadence.
Mm-hmm.
Gus had a couple good ones as well. There was a couple that Gus had of like the whole stadium, and it was like, wow, I didn't even realize that's what this place could actually look like from all the times I saw it on TV.
Very wide stadium. Very different layout than the Memorial Stadium. Kind of situated similar to the Big House, where it's very flat, kind of.
Yeah, it's definitely got that old school bowl style for sure. So let's get into the game a little bit itself. We have already talked on the show a little bit about the game, but I wanted to get some of your perspective from actually being there. After seeing a game of the Dana Holgorsen offense, what were some things that you liked and what were some things that you really didn't care for?
I liked how they got more people involved. I like seeing Janier and Bonner get some plays drawn up from him. I like seeing Luke Lindenmeyer get some plays drawn up for him. Just kind of adding these weapons in. I know Holgorsen said today that he's already found some guys that haven't been playing, that he wants to get the ball more and thinks that can help them win. I think just seeing a lot of different people get going. I also like seeing Dante Dowdell and Emmett Johnson both kind of have a solid game. It seems like they've kind of switched off on who has the hot hand. I think having both of them be like guys you can go to is important, especially when Amir Johnson comes back. I think throwing him in there could be interesting. I really didn't care for. They still didn't really go deep. I mean, they still aren't using Raiola's arm. They did in the first few games, but I did like how they had him go more in the intermediate game. But I think Raiola looked a lot more confident in his reads in the new Holgorsen offense. That might just be a him thing, not a Holgorsen thing, but it was very promising to see that.
Do you think we're starting to see Rayola come out of his shell a little bit. I mean, Marcus Satterfield clearly had his handprints all over him. The loss to UCLA, he, as Ben Droz has already talked about in the show, a deer in the headlights. We talked about it ad nauseum. Did he look a little bit less like a deer in headlights, or do you think that he's starting to find a little bit of direction?
Yeah, especially in the UCLA game, you could see him kind of like almost pump fake the ball a little bit, just like being so second guessing his reads. I didn't see that a lot, especially even when he wouldn't see his first or second read against USC. Against UCLA, he would kind of like deer in the headlights, like Ben said. But I think against USC, he was more confident in just like tucking in running or looking for another read or just like extending the play. There were a few times where he just like, even if he didn't gain any yards, he instantly tucked it and ran. I think that was promising to see, especially because we saw that he does have legs that Satterfield didn't know about, obviously.
Do you like that that's starting to get used in the offense more?
I'm really indifferent to it. He's not like the most explosive guy, but I think just having him be able to confidently tuck it and run when there's space is something that most offenses should have. A lot of offenses have it, and Nebraska hasn't really shown it. Like UCLA's Ethan Garbers, he's not really a running threat, but he had the confidence to tuck it and run it for 57 yards against Nebraska. I think having that asset of his legs is always going to be beneficial.
I think something interesting, too, is when Dana Holgorsen came over, we all know about his very famed air raid offense, and especially for some of these middle-of-the-pack Big Ten schools, that's not exactly something you can get away with, and I think that's hard to try and throw on to Rayola as a freshman who's had Marcus Satterfield as a play caller for 9 games, and clearly it did not work out. But I think it's real interesting to think that Rayola had more passing attempts than Jada Mayava had, and there wasn't a lot of rushing attempts, if I remember correctly. I think it was under 20.
Yeah.
If I remember right, which I think for what they're trying to create from this offensive side of the ball, I don't know if I'm super sold on it for this season, especially when it seems like the running game is starting to find a little bit more footing than it did in the middle of the season.
Yeah, obviously Holgorsen's had tons of success throwing the ball. I think the stat was that in all 6 years as an offense coordinator at the FBS level, his teams have finished top 3 in passing offense every single year. Obviously had a lot of good stuff at like Texas Tech. Those offenses were absolutely insane. But we're obviously not going to replicate that in Nebraska, but I think even that amount of passing, especially in the Big Ten when you're not going to see a lot of teams that are adapted to that kind of offense. Going away from the run, they've kind of already been doing it, so I'm not opposed to it if Holgorsen is especially going to flesh out that passing game more.
Do you think that in time that Holgorsen can fully implement an air raid offense and make Rayola one of those quarterbacks that he's gotten to work with in the past?
I don't think Rule or even like Nebraska fans would allow an air raid team in the state. I can't see it, but I think them being a pass heavy offense, like more of a Lincoln Riley offense, like spreading out the field, getting your guys in space, stuff like that is more what they're going towards. I don't think they ever go towards an air raid team.
Yeah, and I think that Holgorsen is really getting his hands dirty with this team. We are recording today on a Tuesday, on Coordinator Tuesday, when they all got to speak today, and we got to hear from Holgorsen for the first time, and he might be the most blunt guy I've ever heard on the podium.
That's where I was going to use. He's extremely blunt. When they asked about why he even took the job, he just said he was bored. Obviously, he said that Rule talked to him about it in January, and he just really wasn't ready to take it on. But I think just him being able to just jump into it right away and already kind of be a favorite among the media and just among fans, just to add that change of pace in there, it's nice to have the fresh perspective from him.
What do you think about him calling people out, not by name, but more by like position group or by skill set?
I think it's good. I think Rule obviously has been very good for development and very great for the players, but I think he needed kind of the bad cop. And I think Holgorsen's the guy who is ready to call these guys out. He's had all that success. I think it was needed in the room, especially on the perimeter blocking, which they talked about today. I think someone calling these guys out, not for not like pointing them out, but just saying, hey, I know you're better than this. You guys have good frames. You should be out there perimeter blocking a lot better.
Do you think then, with the way that Holgerson spoke today, that those were things that Marcus Satterfield was not doing when he was the play caller?
I think he was just kind of expecting them to get better because he obviously probably had confidence in them and he knew that they could perimeter block well, just for example. But I just don't think he was ready to make them push themselves as much as Holgerson is.
Yeah, I think that coming up this week, we're going to start to see something a little more complicated. We talked about it last week on the show, how, especially from my perspective, that you kind of have to use the Satterfield playbook. Holgerson was only in the building for 2 weeks. Holgerson needed to go through the playbook and tear up whatever pages he didn't like. And I also argued that he should take the playbook to some of the senior leaders or some of like the big leaders on offense, guys like Ben Scott. I think I named Fedoni. I think I named Nair as well. He needed to bring the playbook to those guys and be like, what do you think we should change? What don't you like? We need to figure out what's the best game plan to keep it as simple as possible on Saturday against USC. It seemed like that they were mostly doing the same thing. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, post-game, Emmett Johnson, when he spoke and he was asked about how the playbook looked, he basically just talked about how much simpler it felt. And I think that's good, especially when such a drastic shift in offensive and who's at the helm. I think if he tried to throw everything on them, it would not have worked well.
Which is the right move to do at that point in time.
I think keeping it simple and just kind of adapting to what you have or what Holgerson had was what he really did. There were still a lot of short passes, a lot of screen passes, as Satterfield is known for. They felt a lot more strategically timed than they were before. But I think it is a fair assessment that he tried to simplify and slightly modify the Satterfield playbook.
And I think this week we're going to start to see more modifications.
Yeah.
I think the expectations out of the offense this week are going to be a little higher, not drastically, but I think we're going to see slight incrementations of what our expectations are going to look like. And now that we've gotten to see a week out of what Holgerson can bring to the table, I think we're going to begin to see some further development when that coming up this week with Wisconsin, which let's get to that real quickly. What are a couple of your key things that you're looking for in this Wisconsin game this week?
I'm looking at them limiting Tawee Walker, Wisconsin's running back, leading rusher. They've struggled against the run game. I mean, Woody Marks, he started slow this past week, and then it seemed like every single play he was getting 7 or 8 yards later. I think Wisconsin does have kind of a rotation of running backs that is able to rotate into the game, and they've struggled more against that kind of rotation thing in the running game. I think, for example, they limited Kyle Monangai of Rutgers pretty well, but then when you add in other teams, like USC had Marks, and they also had Quentin Joyner, who came in for a little bit of change of pace. I think limiting that kind of running back committee is important. I think just not allowing Braden Locke to get guys into space. Nebraska's not been very well in tackling in space, especially on the flats. I think limiting that in the flats, which USC tried to attack, and Nebraska did a pretty good job of adjusting to that this week. I think limiting the flats is very important in any game, but I think especially this week, especially when Locke is not a guy who is going to go downfield more.
Couple other things. Lots of turmoil going on with the coaching staff. The offensive coordinator gets fired this week going into the Nebraska game, and it sounds like it's going to be OC by committee, according to what head coach Luke Fickell said. What is your perception on all that with everything that's going on up in Madison?
I don't think it's going to have as big of an impact as people think. I think Phil Longo definitely already had some kind of game plan for Nebraska, and Rule said Monday that Phil Longo's game plan was one of the best they saw last year, or the best. I think that the new coordinator by committee, whoever it is, I think they're just going to try and roll with what Longo had especially, or just try and roll with what they had last season, especially because Nebraska's not really adapted their defense since last season. I think them being able to roll out there with their game plan from last year with some modifications will be just fine. I don't think the Longo firing will do a lot in the short term.
Do you think, in your honest opinion, that Husker fans feeling very uneasy about this week after Wisconsin only losing by 3 points to number 1 Oregon is justified?
I've always thought that you can't really judge opponents based off who they play closely or lose too closely or beat, because every team matches up differently. The game is played on the field, it's not played on the stat sheet. Wisconsin's a very, very tough environment to play in. I think that was going to be close either way. Wisconsin loves to slow the game down, and they obviously did that. They still lost, though, especially now they're rolling into Lincoln, senior day, last home game of the year. Fans, I'm not sure about how the turnout would be, especially with the disappointment of the last few weeks. But I don't think the Oregon game is very telling of how good Wisconsin is, because we also have to remember that just a few weeks before the Oregon game, they lost 42-10 to Iowa. It's just you can't really take that Oregon game as the end-all be-all.
I like how you brought up the fan aspect of it. What do you think this environment's going to be like on Saturday? Because at least off the top of my head, I can't imagine it's going to be very positive.
Yeah, especially if it was a night game, I would expect maybe a decent turnout, but like last game of the year, it's going to be cooler than other games.
And going up against a volleyball game later that night.
Yeah, especially some people just want to camp out for the volleyball game. But a lot of fans were tuned out. I mean, we were there at the Colorado game. Fans were there way before the game. It was like 3 hours. Student section was full 2 hours before the game. That was because there was so much excitement around that game and the team still then. And now that it's just kind of faltered. Even like UCLA, the crowd just seemed completely flat. And after these past 2 weeks, I would expect it to be around the same or maybe even worse.
You think it's going to be at least 80% capacity?
I think so. I think they're like Nebraska usually is at that number no matter what. But no matter how many people are there, I'm not sure how many people will be that into the game.
Okay, better question. How many people do you think are left after halftime?
That's a tough. Well, the game flow will probably determine that. I bet it will be a close first half, so I don't think a ton will leave after halftime. If the game's boring, you can probably see a lot of like Fairweather fans leave. Just get out of there, maybe want to go to volleyball. I still think there will be a decent turnout, especially because it's senior day, but I'm not sure how much people will be into it.
All right, well, on that rate, we got an unofficial score prediction coming up for you. We don't have score predictions published yet. They'll be out later this week, but let's hear what you got. What are you anticipating this week with Nebraska-Wisconsin football?
Last week, I was the only editor to choose Nebraska.
And I laughed at you.
Everyone chose a close game. I decided to flip the game a little bit. But I think I'm going to do it again. I'll probably be the only one to choose that, but I think Nebraska pulls this one out. I think they finally do it. Score, obviously, it's probably going to be a low-scoring game. I'm not sure what the total is right now on the betting sites, but I would think it would hover around the 37-40 range, so I'm going to say 20-17 Nebraska.
That was Ben Dro's prediction as well.
Okay, I will change it now. 24-17 Nebraska.
That's okay. His was 2017 Wisconsin.
Oh, okay, I'll keep 2017.
Okay, so 2017 Nebraska. Ben Dro's was 2017 Wisconsin. I went with 17-14 Wisconsin. I'm still not a huge believer right now. I really do think that a lot of this negative energy is justified. Yeah. And I know, as I've been saying all season long, that I am not a believer until I see it. Yeah. And so far, I just really haven't seen much of it.
We're all going to choose the low scores, and then it's going to be a high-scoring game, just like how for Colorado we all chose the very high scoring, and then
it's 28-7, I think.
28-10.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Ben, thanks for dropping by, and we will catch you back on the next time. Back to your regularly scheduled programming.